Hey Everione. Welcome to my channel, Mary Johnson's Tales. I'm here to spin some good old American folk stories, throw in a few wild mysteries, and cover all kinds of juicy topics. Stick around for today's yarn. Back in the 1870s, out in the rugged hills of West Virginia,
Tere was a blacksmith hammering away in the little town of Coal Creek Hollow.
This guy, let's call him Jake, was a tough nut to crack. He had a stare that could burn through steel. And folks said it was downright spooky. Strangers passing through wouldn't dare get too close. Mostly cause Jake wasn't winning any beauty contests. Scarred face, wild hair, the works. He was pushing past 30, still a bachelor, no ring on his finger. But here's the kicker, Jake had a heart of gold. He was the kind of fella who'd drop everything to help a neighbor out. Someone's barn roof caved in. Jake was there with his hammer. Horse threw a shoe. He'd fix it free of charge. The folks who knew him couldn't say enough good things about the man. One sunny afternoon, while Jake was pounding away at a horseshoe in his forge, the town's deputy sheriff, a wiry guy named Tom Grayson, strolled up to the shop. Jake figured Tom was there to order some new ironwork, maybe a set of spurs or a gate latch. But Tom leaned against the doorframe, hat tipped back, and said, "Jake, I got something bigger to talk about." Jake wiped the sweat off his brow and listened up. Turns out, a local fella named Henry Dawson had just passed away, kicked the bucket out of nowhere. Henry's wife, Clara, up and vanished the night before, leaving their 5-year-old boy, Tommy Dawson, all alone. The kid's uncle wouldn't take him in, said he had enough mouths to feed already. So Tom, scratching his beard, laid it out plain. "Jake, I'm hoping you might take the little tyke in. Raise him up." Jake's heart sank. Poor Tommy, losing his pa so young, and now his ma running off like that. "Kid's got it rough," Jake muttered, shaking his head.
Don't worry, Tom.
"I'll take him in." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "Good man. Treat him right, and that boy'll never forget it. He'll grow up strong, look after you when you're old and gray. Plus, this forge of yours'll have someone to pass down to." So Jake headed over to the Dawson place, picked up little Tommy, and brought him home. From that day on, he treated the kid like his own flesh and blood. Best cuts of meat from the butcher?
Tommy got
Jake even stitched up a couple of new shirts for the boy with his own 2 hands. Tommy was a sharp kid, grateful as all get out for Jake tucking him in. Every morning, he'd hop out of bed at dawn, sweep the yard, and pitch in at the forge however he could, hauling wood, fanning the flames. Jake started teaching him the tricks of the trade too, how to heat the iron just right, how to swing a hammer. He figured if Tommy learned the craft young, he'd grow up to be a top-notch blacksmith, someone who could stand on his own 2 feet. Tommy Dawson turned out to be a quick learner. Jake would show him something once, how to shape a plow blade or temper a knife, and the kid locked it in. By the time he hit 13, Tommy was swinging a hammer alongside Jake. And after a few years of sweat and sparks, he'd grown into a blacksmith just as tough as his adopted pa. Jake's influence rubbed off on him too. Tommy had that same big heart. Walking down the dirt roads of Coal Creek Hollow, he'd stop to help an old widow carry her firewood or fix a busted wagon wheel for a sickly farmer. Folks around town started saying, "That boy's a chip off the old block." Jake raised him right. One crisp fall day, Tommy headed to the market in town with a bundle of sickles to sell. On his way back, cutting through the thick pine woods along Black Bear Trail, he heard a sound that stopped him cold, someone sobbing their eyes out. Something didn't feel right, so he pushed through the brush to check it out. There, sitting on the damp ground with her head in her hands, was a young woman, maybe 18 or 19. Her name was Ellie Harper, a gal from the edge of town. Ellie'd had it rough since she was a kid, lost both her folks to a fever when she was little, and ended up stuck living with her no-good uncle and aunt. They treated her more like a hired hand than family, worked her to the bone, never a kind word. "Ellie, what's wrong?" Tommy asked, kneeling down beside her. She looked up, tears streaking her face, and just started bawling harder. Turns out that morning, her aunt had lost a cheap hairpin and accused Ellie of stealing it to sell. When Ellie swore she hadn't, her aunt lit into her, slapped her around and kicked her out.
Shet ran off to the woods to the it out. Novere Else to go.
Tommy knew her uncle and Aunt Bill and Martha Crane were a rotten pair, but he couldn't exactly march over and tell him off. So he just sat there, patting her shoulder, saying, Hey, it's gonna be all right. Don't let him break you. Ellie sniffled, wiped her face with her sleeve, and pulled herself together. She thanked him quiet-like, then hightailed it back home before her kin got any madder. Word around Coal Creek Hollow was that Bill and Martha Crane, Ellie's uncle and aunt, were a couple of low-down skunks. They'd borrow tools from neighbors and forget to bring 'em back. Haggle shopkeepers till they were blue in the face, then stiff 'em on the bill. Most folks in town steered clear of that pair, couldn't trust 'em as far as you could throw 'em. Last year, Bill had sweet-talked Jake into making him a new hoe for the garden. Promised to pay up later, but that money never showed. So when Martha sent Ellie down to the forge to ask for a couple of sickles, on credit of course,
Tommy hesitated.
he didn't want to get burned again, but Ellie looked so beat down, he caved and handed him over. Bill and Martha were tickled pink with Ellie for pulling it off. They got so bold, they sent her back a week later to snag a kitchen knife, free of charge naturally. Ellie didn't want to go. She knew it was wrong, and she hated Fasten Tommy with more of their nonsense. But when she said no, Bill and Martha turned mean, shoved her around, left bruises on her arms.
Vis no kvase. Ellie dreget herself back to Jakes forge. Het hung low.
Her face all puffy and purple from the roughen up. Jake took one look at her and growled, "Those cranes ain't worth the dirt under their boots, treating a girl like that." Tommy clenched his fists. "I ought to go over there and give him a piece of my mind, make him stop hitting her." Ellie grabbed his arm, tears welling up. "No, Tommy, don't. They'll just take it out on me worse." Jake nodded grimly. "She's right, son. Stirrin' that hornet's nest'll only make her life harder." He handed Ellie the knife anyway, saying, "Take it and go."
Vil el figure so metin out.
As Ellie shuffled off, her thin frame disappearing down the road, Jake and Tommy swapped a look. "A darn shame," Jake said, shaking his head. "Good girl like that, stuck in a mess like this. We gotta help her." Tommy perked up. "What if we haul Bill and Martha up to the sheriff, Pa?"
Let the law sorting out.
Jake snorted. "Sheriff Grayson's a decent fella, but he turns a blind eye to trash like the Cranes. They've been slippery too long, complainin' won't do squat. I got a better idea." "What's that, Pa?" Tommy asked, leaning in.
Jakes eist twinklet. Jure gettin to be a man now, Tommy.
"Old enough to settle down.
How'd you feel about taking Ellie as your wife?"
We marry her into this family. She's out of that hellhole for good." Tommy's ears turned red, and he scratched the back of his neck. "Well, shoot, Pa."
Ellie's a fine gal, Sure.
"But Bill and Martha? They're greedy as sin, they'd never let her go without a fight." Jake grinned. "Only one way to find out. Tomorrow, I'll fetch Widow Pearson, she's the best matchmaker in 3 counties. We'll pay the Cranes a visit and see what they say." The next morning, Jake tracked down Widow Pearson, Coal Creek Hollow's go-to-gal for matchmaking. She was a spry old bird, sharp as a tack, with a tongue that could talk a mule into dancing. By Wednesday, the two of them were trudging up the dusty path to Bill and Martha Crane's ramshackle cabin. Jake had his jaw set firm, and Widow Pearson carried a basket of biscuits, figured a little tearing up couldn't hurt. When they knocked, Bill cracked the door open, squinting at him like they were peddling snake oil. "What's this about?" he grunted, chewing on a wad of tobacco. "We're here to talk about Ellie," Jake said, straight to the point. "Tommy's taken a shine to her, and I reckon she'd make him a fine wife." Bill's eyes narrowed, and he hollered for Martha. She shuffled out, arms crossed, looking sour as a green persimmon. Widow Pearson piped up, "Ellie's a peach, pretty as a picture, works hard too. A real catch." Bill spat into the dirt. "Our Ellie's a looker, all right. 1 in 100. Ain't gonna be cheap to let her go." Jake squared his shoulders. "Name your price, then. Let's hear it." Martha smirked, sizing him up. $20 cash. Hard money, not promises. Take it or leave it. Inside the cabin, Ellie overheard from behind a thin wall, her heart sinking like a stone.
$20?
That was more'n most folks round here saw in a year. She bit her lip, tears stinging her eyes. Widow Pearson clucked her tongue.
$20?
For a gal from a regular family? That's highway robbery. Who's got that kind of coin lying around? Bill shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. Can't pay it, can't have her. Someone'll cough it up, or she stays put. Scram. Widow Pearson huffed, mutterin', "Fine, let your Ellie turn into an old maid then, you stubborn jackass." But Jake held up a hand. "Hold on now. $20, you say? Done. I'll make it happen." The porch went dead quiet. Bill and Martha swapped a look, didn't reckon Jake had it in him. Widow Pearson gaped. "Jake, you crazy? You and Tommy scraped by blacksmithin'. You don't need to throw good money at these buzzards. Plenty of gals to marry Tommy for free." Bill grinned, showing a gap where a tooth used to be. "Cash on the barrelhead, blacksmith. Bring the money, take the girl. No money, no deal." Jake tipped his hat and marched off with Widow Pearson in tow, her grumblin' echoing behind him. Back at the forge, he dug into an old cigar box under the workbench, his life savings. He counted out every nickel and dime he'd squirreled away over the years. Came up short, way short, of $20. He and Tommy hauled every spare tool, horseshoe, and hinge they'd made to the market, sellin' 'em off cheap to anyone who'd buy. Still wasn't enough. Over the years, folks round town owed Jake for work he'd done, axes sharpened, plows fixed. He'd never been one to chase debts, too soft-hearted to hound 'em. But now, with Ellie on the line, he sent Tommy door to door, callin' in every favor owed. Tommy trudged back at dusk, head hangin' low. "Ain't nobody paid up, Pa. They're all dirt poor, couldn't even scrape together a dime. Felt bad a skin, so I gave 'em a few cents instead." Jake stared at the pitiful pile of coins on the table, his gut twistin'. They were stuck. Jake and Tommy sat there, staring at their measly pile of coins, the forge fire cracklin' low behind him. Tommy kicked at the dirt floor. "Maybe we oughta let it go, Pa. We tried." Jake's jaw tightened. "No, son. I can't stand by and watch Ellie waste away with those cranes. If we don't step up, they'll sell her off to some other lowlife for a quick buck. We're her shot." Tommy mulled it over, then his eyes lit up. "Pa, I heard tell of a patch of wild ginseng up in the deep woods. Old man Tucker swears he saw some last spring, worth a fortune if you can find it. What if I head up there and dig us a haul? That'd cover the $20 easy." Jake frowned. "That's a tall tale, Tommy. Folks been chasing ginseng legends for years. Plenty come back empty-handed, and some don't come back at all. Too risky." "I'll be careful, Pa," Tommy said, standing tall. "If I don't find nothin', I'll turn right around. Promise." Jake didn't like it one bit, but Tommy's mind was made up. So he forged the boy 2 sharp hunting knives, good for diggin' or fendin' off trouble, and strapped them to his belt. "You watch yourself out there," Jake warned, voice thick. Tommy set out at dawn, trekking up into the wild hills beyond Coal Creek Hollow. By nightfall, a storm rolled in, rain pouring down in sheets, wind howling through the pines. Soaked and shivering, he ducked into a cave to wait it out, striking a fire with some damp twigs. As the flames flickered, a stranger stumbled in, a lanky fellow with a wild beard and a red flower pinned to his hat. Looked plumb ridiculous, like he'd wandered out of a circus. Tommy figured he was another ginseng hunter and nodded hello. The man grinned, teeth flashing in the firelight. "You reckon I look human, kid?" Tommy chuckled, caught off guard. "Well, sure you do. What else do you be?" The stranger laughed, a deep rattling sound, and clapped Tommy on the shoulder. "Thanks for that, Sharp Eyes. Been a while since someone said something nice." Before Tommy could ask what he meant, the man bolted out into the storm, vanishing into the dark. "Rain's pouring buckets out there." Tommy hollered after him, but he was gone. For 2 weeks, Tommy roamed those hills, digging under roots, poking through brush, dodging bear tracks. The food in his sack ran dry, and once, a wolf's howl got way too close for comfort. No 1,000-year ginseng turned up, just a handful of common roots, decent but nothing special. Worn out and half-starved, he hiked back to town and swung by McBride's general store instead of heading home. Old man McBride, the storekeep, squinted at the muddy bundle Tommy dumped on the counter. "Where'd you dig these up, boy?" he asked, poking at the roots with a gnarled finger. "Up in the high hills," Tommy said, wiping sweat off his brow. "Took 'em from some rough spots." McBride's eyes flickered, something sly passin' over his face. "Ain't worth much." I'll give you $5. Tommy crossed his arms. 5? These ain't no ordinary roots. Took me half a month to find 'em. $10, or I'll take 'em down to Harper's Trading Post and see what they say. McBride grumbled, but when Tommy turned to walk out, he barked, "Hold up. Fine, $10. He sent his clerk to fetch the cash, and Tommy pocketed it, knowing full well McBride was lowballing him. But $10 was $10. He raced home to Jake with the haul. Tommy burst through the forge door, grin split in his face, and slapped the $10 down on the table. Jake's eyes went wide, half amazed, half relieved, and he yanked the cigar box out from under the workbench. They pooled Tommy's haul with every last cent they'd scraped together, counting it out slow and careful. $20 exactly, not a penny more, not a penny less. "We got it, Pa." Tommy hooped, but Jake held up a hand. "Hold your horses, son. The Cranes'll weasel out if they can, better make this airtight." So they grabbed Deputy Sheriff Tom Grayson and Widow Pearson, figuring witnesses would keep things square. The four of them marched back to the Cranes' cabin, money in hand, ready to seal the deal. Bill and Martha were lounging on the porch when they showed up, smirking like cats with cream. Jake slapped the $20 into Bill's grubby palm, saying, "There's your cash. Ellie's ours now." Bill counted it slow, like he didn't trust his own eyes, while Martha peeked over his shoulder. They'd figured Jake and Tommy'd never pull it off. Now they were kicking themselves for not a Skidmore. Martha piped up, voice sharp as a razor, "Hang on, this ain't enough. Make it 30, or she stays." Tom Grayson's mustache twitched. 30? You greedy buzzards swallow an elephant whole. Ain't no family round here asks that much for a bride. You're ruinin' the town's good name. Bill and Martha squirmed, didn't want to cross the deputy, but they weren't backing down easy. "Fine, 20'll do," Bill muttered, stuffing the cash in his pocket. "But we'll set the weddin' date." Jake narrowed his eyes. "Fair enough, but let's hear it." Martha chimed in, "I been feelin' poorly lately, need Ellie round to tend me. Once I'm back on my feet, she can go. Won't be long, 10 days, 2 weeks tops." Jake and Tommy swapped a look. Sounded reasonable, and with Tom there, the Cranes wouldn't dare skip out. "All right," Jake said. "But we're holding you to it." They shook on it, and the group headed back to town, leaving Bill and Martha cackling over their windfall. Soon as the dust settled, Bill and Martha started plotting. $20. Martha crowed, fanning herself with the bills. "We're set for months, maybe years." Bill grinned, sly as a fox. "You're thinking small, woman. This is just the start." Martha blinked. "What are you cooking up now? We can't squeeze Jake again. Tom'll have our hides." Bill leaned in close, whispering low, and Martha's face lit up like a 4th of July sparkler. "Genius," she hissed. "Pure genius." 2 days later, Martha came hobbling down to the forge, wailing like a banshee, tears streaking her face. "Jake. Tommy," she sobbed, clutching her side. "It's awful, Ellie's gone. Last night, round midnight, that no-good saloon rat, Silas Boone, busted in with his gang. Snatched her right out of the house. Beat Bill half to death too, he's laid up bleedin' something fierce." Jake's hammer froze mid-swing, and Tommy's blood ran cold. "Silas Boone," he spat. That name was poison round Coal Creek. Silas was a mean OL cuss, 50-some years old. Known for drinking, gambling, and stealing anything that wasn't nailed down, women included. Tommy didn't wait for more. He tore off toward the Crane's place to see for himself. Sure enough, Bill was sprawled out, bandaged up, leg twisted bad, groaning like a dyin' hog. Martha wailed, "If he don't pull through, what'll I do?" But something stunk worse than a skunk in a henhouse. Tommy couldn't shake the feeling this was a setup. Tommy stormed back to the forge, face red as a barn, and told Jake what he'd seen. "Bill's beat up bad, Pa, looks real. But I don't trust him. Something's off." Jake set his hammer down, eyes dark. "Silas Boone's a snake, all right, but the Cranes are slicker'n owl spit. You go check on him, see if Ellie's really there. I'll poke around here." Tommy grabbed his knives and hightailed it to town, heading straight for Silas's rundown shack on the edge of Coal Creek. Silas was a big shot in his own mind, lorded over a gang of drunks and thieves from his perch at the Rusty Spur Saloon. Folks said he'd ruined more'n a dozen good girls, snatching him up whenever he pleased. Tommy banged on the door, but the greasy-haired hired man, Silas's so-called butler, blocked the way. "Boss is busy," the man sneered, cracking his knuckles. "Beat it." "I got urgent business," Tommy shot back. "Tell Silas it's about Ellie Harper, she's my fiancée." The man rolled his eyes. "Wait out here, kid." Tommy paced by the gate, antsy as a cat on a hot tin roof. 2 hours later, the door creaked open, and the hired man waved him off. "Boss ain't in the mood today. Scram." Tommy wasn't talking that for an answer. Soon as the man turned, he shoved past and bolted into the yard. The hired help hollered, grabbing at him, but Tommy dodged, making a ruckus loud enough to wake the dead. Out stomped Silas, 50-odd years of hard living etched into his leathery face, looking madder'n a wet hen. "What's all this racket?" he bellowed, fists balled up. Tommy dropped to his knees, playing desperate. "Sir, Ellie's my wife-to-be. Please let her go, I'm begging ya." Silas's lip curled. "You got some gall, boy, comin' here to steal my gal. Toss him out." The goons grabbed Tommy, but he thrashed, yellin', "We paid the Cranes $20 fair and square. Sheriff Grayson saw it, ask him yourself." Silas froze, squinting down at him. "Hold up. Bring him inside." They dragged Tommy into a dark room, and there was Ellie cowerin' in the corner, pale as a ghost. Silas loomed over her that night, leerin' like a wolf. "Little darlin', you ain't slippin' away tonight." He turned to his men. "Fetch the kid, let's have some fun." Tommy stumbled in, bruised from the scuffle, and locked eyes with Ellie. She choked out, "Tommy, they got you too, I'm so sorry." "I'm gettin' you out of here," he swore, but Silas cut in, voice like gravel. "Enough mush. You too wanna live? Do what I say. Darlin', play nice, and I'll let your boy go. Cross me, and he's buzzard food." Ellie swallowed hard, tears streamin', and nodded, anythin' to save Tommy. He roared, "Ellie, no." But Silas's men yanked him out, locking him in a shed out back. Meanwhile, Jake got worried when Tommy didn't show. He figured the boy'd gone after Silas and hoofed it to town himself. At Silas's place, the hired man fed him a line. "Your kid came by, but he's long gone, headed home. Boss let him off easy, 'cause he's young and dumb." Jake didn't buy it. He checked the forge, empty, then swung by the Cranes again. There they were, sprawled on the floor, bloodied and groanin', worse'n before. "Tommy been here?" Jake demanded. They just whimpered, too beat up to talk, or so it seemed. Turns out, the Cranes had sold Ellie out from the start. They'd peddled her to Silas for $50, not a kidnapping. Then staged the whole robbery to throw Jake off, complete with fake wounds and crocodile tears. But Silas got wind of the truth from Tommy's outburst, and sent his boys to rough up Bill and Martha, tucking back his cash for being double-crossed. Now the Cranes were too scared, or too broke, to fess up. Jake stood over the Cranes, their moans ringing hollow in his ears. He didn't trust their act one bit. Something was rottener than week-old fish. With Tommy still missin' and night fallin' fast, he raced to the sheriff's office in town. "Tom!" he barked, banging on the desk. Tommy went to Silas Boone's place and ain't come back. "I need help." Sheriff Grayson rubbed his temples, sighin' heavy. "Silas, huh? All right, I'll round up some boys and check it out." They hauled Silas and his crew down to the jailhouse for questioning, but the old buzzard played dumb. "Don't know nothin' 'bout no kid," Silas growled, spittin' tobacco juice on the floor. "Never seen him." Jake's gut screamed different. Tommy was in trouble, maybe even dead, but with no proof, the law let Silas walk. Days turned into a week, and Jake scoured every inch of Coal Creek Hollow, a skinfolks, checkin' barns. Nothin'. Just a gnawin' dread that wouldn't quit. Back at Silas's shack, Ellie didn't know Tommy was gone missin'. To keep the peace, and keep Silas off her back, she'd bent to his will, becomin' his 10th wife, in a string of poor gals he'd snared. She hated every second, but it was that or worse. Then, a few months later, Silas's cook-up and quit, caught a fever and skipped town. His hired man put out word they needed a replacement, and along came a woman callin' herself Ruby Finch. Ruby wasn't much to look at, broad shoulders, rough hands, not a hint of dainty in her. Silas sized her up and snorted. Ugly as sin. You ain't fit to cook in my house. Ruby planted her feet, voice steady as steel. You're hirin' a cook, not a bride, mister. I ain't here to look pretty, I'm here to feed ya. My grub's the best you'll taste. Don't like it? I'll walk. Silas scratched his chin, amused. All right, tough gal. Whip me up some stewed fish, let's see what you got. Ruby marched to the kitchen, and in no time, a pot of fish stew hit the table, smellin' like heaven. Silas took a bite, eyes poppin'. Well, I'll be damned. You're hired. Stay put and keep that comin'. From then on, Ruby settled in, slinging grub so good even Silas's goons tipped their hats to her. Ruby noticed Ellie right off. Girl looked like a shadow, skinnier every day, smile long gone. One mornin', she pulled Silas aside. That gal of yours, Ellie, she's wastin' away. Reckon it's her stomach actin' up. I can fix her some special victuals, fatten her up a bit. Silas waved a hand. Fine, do it. She gets plump and pretty again, I'll toss you a bonus. So Ruby got to work. Every day, she'd simmer a bowl of hearty oatmeal, laced with honey and herbs, and bring it to Ellie's room herself. That stuff worked wonders. Soon, Ellie's cheeks got rosy, and she wasn't a walkin' skeleton no more. Grateful as all get out, Ellie started opening up to Ruby, spillin' her guts about the whole mess. How she'd been sold, trapped, and feared for Tommy. Ruby listened, stirrin' a pot, and said, Don't you fret too hard, hon. Take care of yourself first, then we'll sort this out. The two got tight as sisters, and Ellie's laugh started peeking out again, lightin' up her face. Silas took notice, started hangin' round her room every night, smitten all over. Ellie'd tease him gentle, You're gonna stir up trouble with the other gals lingerin' here. They can stew, Silas chuckled. Anyone crosses you, I'll tan their hide. He'd lumber in, reekin' of fish stew, and she'd nudge him off. Go wash up, you old trout, for you stink up my quilt. Tossin' him a flirty wink to keep him sweet. Silas couldn't get enough of Ellie. Night after night, he'd barge into her room, moonin' over her like a lovesick calf. One evening, after scarfin' down Ruby's fish stew, he strutted in, smellin' like a riverbank at low tide. Ellie wrinkled her nose, playin' coy. Lordy, Silas, you're ripe tonight. Go scrub up, for you chase me off. He grinned, callin' for his gal to fetch a washtub. Bring it in here, hot water too. Me and Ellie's takin' a bath. The hired gal scurried off, and soon a big OL tub steamed up the room. Silas started shuckin' his clothes. I mean to peel Ellie's off too, but she danced out a reach. You first, big man, she said, smilin' sweet. I'll join ya in a tick. Silas plopped into the tub, splashin' water everywhere, and Ellie stepped up behind him, rubbin' his shoulders. Right then, Ruby burst through the door, eyes blazin' like a wildfire. Silas twisted round, sputterin', What the hell, woman? Ruby squared up, voice cold as a winter creek. Silas Boone, your reckonin's here. Today's your last. He laughed, naked as a jaybird, and sneered, You lost your mind, cook? Get outta here. Ruby reached up, clawing at her face, and peeled it off like a mask, letting it drop to the floor. Take a good look, you son of a gun, she growled. Silas's jaw hit the tub. Tommy Dawson. You ain't you dead. Tommy, alive and kickin', loomed over him, fists clenched. Silas lunged up, yellin' for help, but Tommy grabbed a skillet from the stove and cracked him square on the skull. He dumped a fistful of salt in the water. Silas howled, thrashin' like a catfish on a line. And then, with a gurgle and a splash, the old buzzard turned into a giant carp flop bin in the tub. Tommy stoked the fire, boiled that fish right up, and left him stewin' in his own juices. By midnight, he'd grabbed Ellie's hand, and they hightailed it out of there, back to the forge. Jake was hammerin' a plow blade when they stumbled in, dusty and wild-eyed. He dropped the hammer, starin' like he'd seen a ghost. Tommy? Ellie? What in blazes? Tommy caught his breath and spilled the whole yarn. Silas let me go that night, or so he said. Halfway home, his boys jumped me. Tossed me off a cliff to die. But I didn't. A fella pulled me out of the ravine. That crazy hermit with the flower in his hat I met in the cave. Turns out he's some kind of mountain spirit, called himself Rattlesnake Joe. Said I'd done him a solid, callin' him human, so he owed me one. When I told him what happened, he gave me a trick root, ate it, and I could change my shape. I cooked up a plan, turned into Ruby Finch, and got hired at Silas's to get close. Told Ellie who I was last week. She was in on it. Silas loved fish, so I made him into one, let him feel what it's like to be supper. Jake shook his head, half Logan, half stunned. Self-made evil don't survive, I reckon. That rat Boone had it comin', hurt too many folks. You done the town a favor, son. With Silas gone, Jake got the preacher in, and Tommy and Ellie tied the knot proper. A woman in the house changed everything. Ellie's touch made the forge a home. And business boomed with her pitchin' in, sellin' wares with a smile. As for Bill and Martha Crane, Silas's boys had left them crippled. Legs busted, hands useless, they hobbled round town beggin' scraps. Folks'd whisper as they passed, evil gets its due. That's their payback right there. One freezin' winter night, the Cranes didn't wake up, froze stiff in their shack. And nobody shed a tear. Well folks, that's the end of our first tale, Mary Johnson said, leanin' back with a grin. Tommy and Ellie made it through, and Coal Creek Hollow's a quieter place without Silas stirrin' up trouble. Stick around now, I've got another yarn comin' your way, and it's a doozy. If this first one hooked ya, you'll be glued to the next. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment, I want to hear what you think. Our second story's an old folk tale called The Drifter's Secret. Picture this, a fella takes in a beat-up stranger, patches him up, and gets told to dig 3 feet under his pa's grave. Turns out, there's more dirt down there. Let's dive in. Back in the fall of 1885, out in the dusty plains of Kansas, there was a dirt-poor farmer named Jack Riley livin' in the little settlement of Prairie Bend. Jack wasn't no fancy scholar, but he'd scratched out a livin' workin' the land since he was a boy. At 26, he'd finally saved enough to marry a gal named Sadie Miller. Took 3 years of courtin', but she said yes, and they settled into a shack on his patch of earth. Not long after, Sadie gave him 2 young uns, a boy Jimmy, born first, and a little girl, Annie, 2 years later. Jimmy was a spitfire at 5, sharp as a whip, always askin questions. And Annie, just 3, was a quiet little thing, big eyes ta keen in the world. The Riley clan doted on em, those kids were their pride and joy. You'd think Sadie'd be content with a roof, a husband, and 2 healthy young uns. But she wasn't. She'd nag Jack something fierce, leanin' on the porch rail, watchin' the sun sink over the wheat fields. Look at Tom Baxter down the road, she'd gripe. Can't read a lick. But he's got his wife and kids eatin' steak and guzzlin' whiskey, livin' high. Then there's you, Jack, can't hardly keep us in beans and cornbread. What's all that sweat in the fields gettin' us? Take a page from Baxter, learn to butcher hogs or something useful. Or look at Pete the peddler, ugly as a mud fence, but he brings his woman trinkets from town every week. I've stuck with you all these years, Jack Riley, what've you ever fetched me? Jack just stand there, chewin' his lip, 'cause deep down he knew she was right. He wasn't bringin' in much, never had, and there wasn't no one else to blame. That naggin stuck with him, rattlin' around his head, till he started wonderin' what else he could do. Sadie wasn't always so sharp-tongued. She'd been a sweet, simple gal once. But seein' other women in Prairie Bend with fuller tables and shinier things twisted her up inside. She couldn't shake the itch for more. One scorchin' July afternoon back in '84, Jack's old man, Hank Riley, came trudgin' home from a job in town. He'd been haulin' sacks at the grain mill for a couple extra bucks, $2 cash, clutched tight in his fist. On his way through Sagebrush Gulch, a lonely stretch of trail lined with twisted trees, a gang of roughnecks jumped him, demandin' his pay. Hank wasn't one to roll over. He swung hard trying to keep what was his, but they beat him bloody for it. If Pete the peddler hadn't rolled by in his creaky wagon that evenin' spotin' Hank half dead in the dust, the old man might have breathed his last right there. Pete hauled him back to Prairie Bend, and Jack scraped together what little they had. Sold off a rusty plow and Sadie's old sewing basket, to nurse him back. But Hank never bounced back. A few days later, he started cuffin' up blood. And before the week was out, he was gone, laid out cold in the shack. Jack and his ma, Widow Ruth, went hat in hand to kin and neighbors, beggin' for loans to bury him proper. Took every sweet word and promise they had to scrape up $6. Enough for a cheap pine box to plant Hank up on the hill. That debt hung over him like a storm cloud, and life in the Riley shack got bleaker by the day. Some nights, they'd split a single biscuit and call it supper. Sadie couldn't stomach it no more. One morning, she grabbed a basket, said she was off to wash clothes by the creek, and never came back. Turned out she'd run off with a carpenter from town. A fella named Cal Hooper, pushin' 40 but smooth talkin', and handy with a saw. Cal could turn a pile of lumber into cash, and Sadie latched onto that like a burr on a sock. She didn't even blink at leaving Jimmy and Annie behind, 5 and 3, cryin' for their ma all day. Cal'd been alone a while, parents dead, wife lost to cholera years back, no kids to tie him down. So he'd planned it all out, whiskin' Sadie away to who knows where. Jack tore through Prairie Bend to skin after her, but nobody'd seen a trace. She and Cal were ghosts, leaving him with a busted heart and 2 little ones to raise. Widow Ruth, 60 and gray, took it hard, her husband gone, her daughter-in-law bolted. Jack was drownin' mournin' his pa, soothin' the kids' tears, and dodgin' folks callin' in those burial debts. More'n once, he slipped out to the barn at midnight, sobbin' into the hay. Or climbed the hill where Hank was buried, thinkin' a rope might end it all. But Ruth's frail hands stitchin' socks by candlelight, and Jimmy and Annie's sleepy faces, kept him hangin' on, one shaky breath at a time. Ruth worked her fingers raw makin' shoe soles and mendin' shirts to chip at the debt. But it wasn't enough. Jack knew they couldn't keep livin' on crumbs and grit. They say hard times make a man rethink his road, and Jack Riley was feelin' that truth bone deep. With the farm barely growin' enough to eat, let alone pay debts, and Sadie gone, he couldn't keep leanin' on dreams of a big harvest that had never come. So he swallowed his pride and went knockin' on Pete the peddler's door. Pete wasn't just a Roman trader. He made a tidy livin' churnin' out cornbread mix for folks round Prairie Bend. Jack'd seen him grind corn and sell it cheap, and figured that might be his ticket. Pete, he said, hat in hand, we're starvin' out there. Teach me your trade, please. Pete, a wiry fella with a soft spot for the Rileys since Savon Hank, took pity. He didn't even charge Jack a dime, just handed over the know-how, free and clear. Cornbread simple, Pete said, tossin' him a sack of meal. Grind it fine, mix it right, sell it fresh. But listen here, town's my turf. You wanna peddle this, you stick to the outskirts. Farmhouses and shacks only, no steppin' on my toes in Prairie Bend proper. Jack nodded quick. Fair deal, Pete. You're the boss, and my teacher. I won't cross ya. He wasn't in no spot to haggle. Pete was throwin' him a lifeline, and he grabbed it tight. Jack was a fast study, even if he'd never cracked a book. 2 days shadowin' Pete, watchin' him mill corn, sift it, bag it, and he had it down pat. By the 3rd day, he rigged up a grindstone in the barn, and started haulin' sacks of cornbread mix round the scattered farms outside town. Left widow Ruth at home with Jimmy and Annie, keepin' the shack from fallin' apart. Them kids grew up quick, poor folks' young uns always do. Jimmy, 5 goin' on 50, could thread a needle for Ruth's stitchin' by lamplight. And he'd scrub pots or boil water without bein' told twice. Annie, just 3, couldn't do much yet, but she'd perch on a stool, watchin' Ruth sew soles, quiet as a mouse, never makin' a fuss. Jack'd hit the trails at dawn with his load, hollerin' cornbread mix, 2 cents a pound. But out in the sticks, folks were tight-fisted, didn't want to part with a penny unless they had to. First couple weeks, he'd trudge home with half his sacks still full. When the heat crept up, that unsold mix'd go stale by nightfall. Smellin' sour, good for nothin', but the pigs or a handout to some broke neighbor. One fella, a trapper named Sam Hawks, took the leftovers regular. Fed 'em to his hogs, 3 fat sows he'd raised on game and scraps. Sam'd made a bundle sellin' pelts, and his pigs didn't mind Jack's day-old mix one bit. Still, Jack'd stare at them spoiled sacks each night, gut twistin'. All that work, and he was barely breakin' even. He started mullin' over how to stretch the mix's life, keep it fresh longer, and how to get folks to buy it for it turned. After some head-scratchin', he hit on a plan: dry the mix extra fine, like flour, and throw in a deal, buy a pound, get a free scoop of parched corn for snackin'. Wouldn't you know it, that trick worked like a charm. 9 out of 10 folks round the outskirts started snappin' up his goods. 4 months in, Jack couldn't grind enough to keep up. And the locals took to callin' him Cornbread Jack, a name he wore prouder'n any gold star. By November of '85, Jack Riley, now Cornbread Jack to everyone round Prairie Bend, was finally seein' some daylight. He'd sold out a whole load of cornbread mix one chilly noon, and was whistlin' a tune haulin' empty sacks back home through Sagebrush Gulch. That same lonesome trail where his pa got jumped stretched out quiet under a gray sky. Then he spotted something, a fella laid out in the weeds by the path, groanin' soft and low. Jack hustled over and crouched down. The man was middle-aged, maybe 40. Face battered, clothes torn, looked like he'd tangled with a grizzly and lost. "Hey, mister, what happened?" Jack asked, keeping his voice steady. The man coughed, wincin'. "Just my luck. Ran into some no-good bushwhackers a ways back. Didn't have much coin on me, so they worked me over instead. Hurts like the devil." Jack's jaw tightened. Those same Sagebrush Gulch bandits, no doubt. The ones who'd killed Hank for $2 and left him for dead. He'd reported it to the county marshal back then, and the law'd sent a posse to flush him out, but the thieves just moved camp. Now it seemed they were back, bold as brass. "Damn their hides," Jack muttered, then shook it off. "You all right to move, mister?" The man waved a shaky hand. "I'll live, maybe. Been robbed and beat. They won't bother me again. You know any doc round here who can patch me up?" "There's Doc Wheeler in Prairie Bend," Jack said. "He's a grump, but he's good. Fixes folks and critters alike. 'Bout 7 miles north up this trail." The man nodded, grimacin'. "Thanks, stranger. You best get. Them bandits might swing back, and I'd hate to see 'em take your haul too." Jack glanced at the coins jinglin' in his pocket, near $1 worth, and felt a prickle up his spine. He started to turn, then stopped cold. "If I leave, what's gonna happen to you?" he asked, looking back. "They've had their fun with me," the man rasped. "I'll crawl along, don't you worry." Jack shook his head. "Nah, you're comin' with me. I ain't lettin' you die out here." The man protested, "I'll slow you down, leave me be." But Jack wasn't hearin' it. "Slow or not, I'm takin' you to Doc. Them bandits show up again, I'll give 'em what for. They took my pa last year, and I've been itchin' to settle that score." The man squinted up at him, then gave a weak nod, too wore out to argue. Jack hoisted him up, one arm round the fella's back, the other steadying his stagger. And they set off through the gulch, steppin' careful over roots and rocks. Took him a good hour, but they made it out of that tangle of sage and scrub without a whiff of trouble. Along the way, the man let slip his name, Will Tate. A drifter headin' to town to visit an old buddy when the bandits caught him. "They got my $10 and my spare shirt," Will grumbled. "Left me with nothin' but bruises." Jack just nodded, keepin' his eyes peeled, till they hit Prairie Bend and Doc Wheeler's doorstep. Jack hauled Will Tate right up to Doc Wheeler's clapboard house on the edge of Prairie Bend. Doc, a wiry old coot with a gray beard and a temper short as a fuse, was just back from tendin' a sick cow. He took one look at Will, slumped against Jack's shoulder, and snorted. "Another damn fool got himself roughed up, huh? All right, lemme see." He poked at Will's cuts and bruises, gruntin' as he went. "Ain't nothin' broke, just flesh wounds. Slap some of my liniment on 'em. Rest a couple days, and he'll be right as rain." Then he held out a hand, squintin'. "That'll be 80 cents, salve and all. You wanna hole up here till you're steady, it's another 80. Cash up front." Will's face went red, half from pain, half from shame. 80 cents? That's a hold-up in broad daylight. I'd pay, but them bandits cleaned me out. I'm flat broke till kingdom come. Jack stepped in quick, sizing up Doc's scowl. "He's kin, Doc, my cousin from out of town. Can't you cut us a break, seein' as we're locals?" Doc crossed his arms, unmoved. "I don't haggle, Riley. Pay or get, family or not." Will grit his teeth, huttin' too bad to walk off, but Jack wasn't lettin' him suffer. He dug into his pocket, pullin' out nigh on $1 from his cornbread haul. "Here's 90 cents, he said, droppin' the coins in Doc's palm. "Fix him up now. I'll square the rest later when he's on his feet." Doc pocketed the cash with a grunt. "Fine, for Prairie Bend's sake, I'll take it. Sit him down." Will shot Jack a look, guilty as sin. "I owe you big, friend. First you drag me here, now you're payin' my way, I ain't worth all this fuss." Jack shrugged. "Out here, folks hit hard times. You'd do the same if the boot was on the other foot. Pay me back when you're flush, don't sweat it till then. Will clasped his hands, earnest as a preacher. You're a saint, Jack. I'll make it double someday, you've got my word. Doc didn't waste no time, smeared his stinky liniment over Will's cuts. And sure enough, the man quit hollerin' quick. Feels like a cool breeze, Will sighed, slumpin' back. Jack figured Will'd heal better at home than in Doc's dusty spare room. So he carted him back to the shack. Widow Ruth perked up when they rolled in. Company, huh? Well, treat him good, Jack. He can stay till he's mended. That night, Jack whipped up a pot of cornbread mush, best he could do with what they had. And the five of them, Jack, Ruth, Jimmy, Annie, and Will, sat round the rickety table, scoopin' it down like it was a feast. 5 days later, Will was near good as new, limpin' less, color back in his face. But one mornin', Jack went to rouse him for breakfast, and the cot was empty. Blankets folded neat, no sign of the man. Jack scratched his head. Did he sneak off, 'cause he couldn't pay me back? Nah, he didn't seem the type. He tore through the shack, peekin' in the barn, callin' out, nada. Half an hour of huntin', and it hit him, Will Tate was gone, no goodbye, no nothin'. Ruth caught wind and frowned deep. A man vanishin' like that, it's a bad omen, Jack. You best head up to your pa's grave today, say a prayer, somethin' ain't right. Jack didn't argue. He gathered some stale cornbread and a jug of water for an off-errand, and hiked up the hill to Hank's resting spot, wonderin' what kind of trouble was brewin'. Jack trudged up the hill to Hank's grave, the wind whippin' through the dry grass of Prairie Bend. He set the jug of water and the hunk of stale cornbread by the rough wooden cross, kneelin' down to whisper a quick prayer like Ruth told him. As he brushed some dirt over the mound, keepin' it tidy like always, he noticed somethin' off, a hole 'bout a foot wide, dug right next to the grave. Jack's heart sank, and he choked up mutterin', Lord Almighty, we're dirt poor. Had to beg just to bury Pa decent. Why'd some varmint pick his spot to rob? He leaned in close, peerin' into the dark. Didn't look deep enough to hit the coffin. Hank's cheap pine box was still safe, far as he could tell. But that just made it queerer. Ain't no grave robber's work, he mused. Maybe a fox or a badger, diggin' a winter den? Nah, too clean for that. He couldn't shake the chill crawlin' up his spine. Ruth's omen talk was gettin' to him. Not wantin' to fret her more, he hightailed it home, grabbed a shovel, and marched back to fill that hole, smoothin' it over till it was gone. He kept his trap shut 'bout it, Ruth didn't need the worry. Then slung his cornbread sacks over his shoulder and hit the trail to sell. With just a handful of pennies in his pocket, he wasn't too fussed 'bout bandits that day. But fate's got a funny way of kickin' a man when he's down. Halfway through Sagebrush Gulch, Jack spotted a heap by the road. Will Tate, beat to hell again, sprawled in the dust like a rag doll. Blood crusted his lip, one eye swelled shut, looked like he'd met those bushwhackers a second time. Will saw Jack comin', and turned his head, too ashamed to ask for help twice. But Jack wasn't one to walk by, he dropped his sacks and knelt down. Will, what in tarnation? You just got patched up, how'd you end up like this? Will wheezed, wipin' a shaky hand cross his mouth. Sorry, Jack. Ran into them bastards again. Guess I'm a magnet for bad luck. Jack's temper flared. Same damn gulch, same damn thieves. Don't talk nonsense, he snapped. You're huttin', we're gettin' you to Doc. I'll carry you myself, business can wait. Will tried to wave him off, breathin' hard. I ain't makin' it this time, Jack. I'm done for, 5 hours tops, Doc'll say. But I need a favor, promise me somethin'. Quit your dyin' talk, Jack growled, hoistin' him up. You're tough, you'll pull through. But Will's eyes were glassy, and Jack knew it was bad. He slung the man over his back, leavin' the cornbread sacks behind, and staggered to Doc Wheeler's, prayin' he wasn't too late. Doc took one look, felt Will's pulse, and shook his head slow. No sev on him this time, Riley. Too much bleedin' inside. He won't see sunrise. Best get his affairs in order. Jack's gut twisted, but he carried Will home, settin' him on the cot, tears stingin' his eyes. All right, Will, he said, voice thick. What's this favor? I'll do it. Up a mountain or through a fire, don't matter. You name it. Will managed a faint smile. You're a hell of a friend, Jack. I ain't fibbin' now, listen close. Back in the Civil War days, my granddaddy hauled a fortune out here to dodge the fightin'. He buried most of it, gold, silver, jewels, right under your pa's grave. Dig 3 feet down from Hank's coffin, and you'll hit it. I got a chunk last night, $100 worth, but there's 1,000 more. Plus 10 gold bars and trinkets galore. Was gonna buy land in town, come back to thank you proper. But them bandits jumped me again in the gulch. That's why I'm here. Jack stared at Will Tate, sprawled on the cot, his breath comin' in ragged gasps. Under pa's grave, he muttered, half-dazed. You're sayin' there's a fortune down there? Will gripped his hand, weak but fierce. Dead serious, Jack. I dug up that $100 myself, left the rest for ya. Leased $1,000, 10 gold bars, and a heap of jewelry. Granddaddy's war stash, hid when the Rebs came marchin'. Your family's good folks, I can go easy knowin' it's yours. If some snake finds it first, I won't rest in my grave. Jack's mind spun. Riches under Hank's bones? Sounded like a tall tale. But Will's eyes burned with truth. What about your kin, Will? I could track him down, send word, let him claim it. Will shook his head slow. Ain't got nobody left. No folks, no friends, just you, Jack. You're the only soul I trust with this. Take it, make your life better. His grip slackened, and with one last rattle, Will Tate was gone. Eyes staring blank at the shack's cracked ceiling. Jack sat there numb, till Ruth peeked in and saw the body. She crossed herself, whisperin', poor soul. Bury him decent, Jack. But Jack's thoughts were churnin' darker. Them Sagebrush Gulch bushwhackers had killed his pa for $2. And now they'd snuffed Will for 100, same damn crew, stalkin' the same damn trail. Why not turn their greed against them? He growled to himself. That night, he slipped up to Hank's grave with a shovel, dug 3 feet past the coffin like Will said, and struck gold. Literally. Sacks of coins, glintin' bars, and a tangle of rings and necklaces. More'n he'd dreamed of seein' in 10 lifetimes. He hauled half of it back to the shack, hid it under the floorboards, and come mornin', rode into town to the marshal's office. Got a bandit problem in the gulch, he told the deputy, voice steady. Caught him with some loot, need a posse to round him up. The deputy nodded, and by dusk, Jack was back in Sagebrush Gulch, lingering deliberate with a sack of gold coins janglin' loud in his pocket. Sure enough, the bushwhackers slunk out of the brush. 7 or 8 grizzled outlaws, knives and pistols glintin' in the moonlight. Jack played scared, droppin' to his knees. Don't shoot. Take it all, please. He tossed a couple gold pieces their way, lettin' 'em gleam in the dirt. Where'd a dirt farmer get that? Their leader snarled, eyes greedy. Jack stammered, found it under my pa's grave. Thought he'd hid some savings, but it's more'n that. An old stash, gold, silver, whole heap of it. We'll never spend it all. The bandits bought it hook, line, and sinker, greed blindin' 'em stupid. They grabbed Jack, draggin' him up the hill to Hank's grave. Figurin' they'd dig the rest and slit his throat after. But as night fell, the marshal's posse, tipped off by Jack, crept in quiet, surroundin' the gulch like wolves on a deer. The bandits were elbow-deep in dirt when the law pounced. Ropes and irons clapped on him fast, haulin' the whole lot to jail. Jack stood back, dust on his hands, watchin' him curse and spit. That's for Pa, he whispered. And Will too. With the bushwhackers locked up tight, Jack Riley walked away from Sagebrush Gulch a changed man. He'd avenged his Pa and Will Tate, and that stash under Hank's grave. $1,000, 10 gold bars, and a glitterin' pile of jewelry was his to keep, fair and square. No more scrappin' by on cornbread crumbs. The Riley shack got a new roof, a proper stove, and a pantry stuffed with flour, bacon, and beans. Jack didn't let the windfall sit idle neither. He bought a bigger grindstone, hired a hand to mill extra cornbread mix, and started sellin' it clear to the county line. No more outskirts only for him. Folks couldn't get enough. Prairie Bend buzzed with talk of cornbread Jack, the farmer who'd struck it rich and still shook hands like a regular Joe. He poured some of that cash into books too, cracked 'em open nights by lamplight, teachin' himself figures and letters he'd never had time for. 3 years later, in '88, Jack took the state exam for a merchant license and passed with flying colors. Set up a proper store in town, dealin' in grain, tools, and his famous mix. He climbed the ladder steady after that. Became a county councilman, then a bigwig in the Kansas Trade Guild. All from a dirt poor start. Good folks get good ends, reckon that's the way of it. Jimmy grew up sharp as a tack. By 1905, at 23, he aced the state college entrance test. Walking out top of his class with a diploma and a grin. Jack threw a 3-day shindig at the old homestead, now a fine house with a wraparound porch. Invitin' every soul in Prairie Bend to celebrate. Tables grown with roast hog, apple pie, and pitchers of cider. And the town turned out in droves, clappin' Jimmy on the back. Toastin' the Riley name that had risen from nothin'. Midst the revelry, an old woman shuffled up. Ragged shawl, face lined like cracked leather, leanin' on a stick. She locked eyes on Jimmy, decked out in his scholar's cap and gown, and burst into sobs, tears cuttin' trails through the dust on her cheeks. "That's my boy," she croaked, voice tremblin'. "My son, look at him now." Folks nearby swapped puzzled looks. Nobody believed her. She was just some beggar, far as they knew, spoutin' nonsense from the whiskey or the years. But a few old-timers whispered later, speculatin' quiet-like. Could that be Sadie Miller, come crawlin' back after ditchin' Jack and the kids? Time chewed her up and spat her out. No one'd recognize her now, not after 20 years of hard livin'. Jack didn't hear her plea, busy Logan with Jimmy and Annie. And the old woman slipped off into the dusk, lost to the crowd. Mary Johnson leaned forward, smilin' at her audience. And that's where our tale ends, folks. Jack turned dirt into gold, literal and otherwise. And them bandits got what was comin'. If you liked this one, drop a line below, tell me what hit you hardest. Subscribe, share it round, and thanks for listenin'. We'll catch you next time with another yarn. Till then, keep your ears open and your hearts full. See ya.